Friends, back again with another Ask MotoMan segment, and this one, let's just say Matt McPherson came up with a topic that he knows will boil my blood, and that is depreciation. This is a monster you and I, fellow car guys and gals, we never really take into account because we fall in love with the metal. But it is absolutely something we need to take into account. So let's unpack the big bad monster that is depreciation. For those of you living under a rock, depreciation is defined as the delta between where you enter the financial transaction that is your love on four wheels, the purchase price of your car, and the point at which you sell your love on four wheels. In other words, the money you lose. Now, this question from Matt is not so much how much are we losing. He wanted me to go through a list of manufacturers that have higher depreciation than others. That's if I'm reading his question correctly. Well, in order to answer this question, I want to turn this around to you and use the logic of, I would rather give you a fishing pole than a fish. So I want you to look at this on why certain brands depreciate more than others. So I think it's common knowledge that you're going to have cars like Chryslers, Jaguars, Audis that depreciate much faster than, say, a Kia or a Honda, at least percentage-wise. We're not talking about absolute dollars here. I'm talking about percentage-wise. And there are very specific reasons why. First and foremost, and this is something that most people don't understand, it is the lease versus buy percentage. Now, I know I owe you a why you shouldn't lease episode, and I promise you that is coming. We just need to do it in a proper studio. That's why it hasn't been done yet. But it's a lease versus buy percentage. We talked about this a little bit in that Volvo XC60 T8 episode we just did. That has a very healthy lease versus buy percentage in that 60% of those vehicles, people write a check or finance the car, 40% lease. Now let's look at the flip side of that, the competitor to the XC60 T8. That would be the F-Pace or an Audi Q5. Most of those are leased, like somewhere between 80 and 90%. Now, you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't care. I just want the cheapest payment I can get. Well, here's why you should care. When a vehicle has a very high lease percentage, as in all Jaguars, all Audis, all Range Rovers, that's the market saying to the car manufacturer, you know what, 100 grand for a fancy SUV like a Range Rover, we don't really agree with you. We'd rather give you $5,000 up front and say $800 a month, which devalues the vehicle, which immediately devalues the vehicle in the used car market. So that's why you can buy, let's say, a 2-3-year-old Range Rover for half or less than half of its original price, probably less than half. And the dirty secret that Audi doesn't tell you is their resale is horrible because their lease percentages are so high. Like if you look at the releases that you get from the folks at Audi, they go on and on about, well, the past like 4 years, 5 years, consistent gains. Well, you gotta read what people aren't telling you, and what they're not telling you is they're aggressively incenting their leases to make sure they continue those double-digit gains even when other manufacturers don't. So you look at a company like Volvo, yes, they're owned by a Chinese conglomerate at this point, but they are still much smaller than Audi. They can't afford to subsidize leases, so they're saying, you know what, why don't we slow down the pace of production of the cars? We don't want to be the top seller out there. And maybe we'll offer a lease. It won't be as competitive as, say, the Audi. But that's okay because we're not trying to sell as many. And overall, that impacts you, the buyer or the driver, because you can buy the car and you don't lose as much money, the dreaded depreciation, or more cases for people like you and I, car guys and gals, we get a car that holds its value even the second or third hand. So you have to look at this, not so much, well, Audis, Chryslers, Jaguars, and Range Rovers consistently have bad resale. Yeah, we know that, but this is the why they have bad resale. Now, in the case of Chrysler, it's very, very different. This is two things that really hit the depreciation. Number one, as you know I love the folks at Chrysler. You know I'm very good friends with Ralph Scheel, and I love the people who engineer, design, and build those cars. And one of the cars, the very few, of a very small list of cars that I actually write a check for, one of those is absolutely a Challenger. At some point when I have a barn where I could put a lot of cars in, one of the first ones is gonna be a Challenger. So it's not me saying I don't like Chryslers, it's just the reality. Chryslers have had maintenance problems, and more importantly, Chrysler puts a lot more money into incentives, retail incentives, but not leases. Like, here's an example. Go and get your Sunday paper, or next Sunday, get your Sunday paper, open up the automobile section, and you are consistently going to see Chargers. You're going to see any one of the Jeeps, but maybe not the Grand Cherokees, and you're going to see the minivans now with these huge incentives. In the case of Chargers, they are the worst in that you consistently see them for 20% discounts from retail, where basis of comparison, the most you're going to get off of a Kia or a Hyundai, 3 to 5%, maybe a Honda, 3%. Even on some of the other domestics, let's take a look at some of those Buicks that are very popular now, like the Enclave. That one, it sells pretty well, but doesn't lease well because there isn't a lot of profit. It only has, I want to say, about 3% profit. So as a result, its resale is pretty good because GM hasn't been able to afford to subsidize the leases like Audi, or in the case, this is something that no one tells you, Mercedes as well. Like if you were to go look at used prices for 2-3-year-old C-classes, they are less than half because there's so many out there that are leased. Not as bad as Audi, nothing close, but the resale is somewhat low compared to other cars in its segment. So again, what I want you to understand here is not that there's a consistent hard and fast rules that Range Rovers just have bad resale because they're Range Rovers, it's why. So in the case of Chrysler, it's two things. It's retail incentives that are very, very heavy, and they're consistently heavy. And number two, some maintenance issues, which we know circle back to the Range Rovers. Now, these are some examples. I could probably spend an hour or two going through depreciation and how it affects personal finance and certain cars. Obviously, on the flip side of it, lower depreciation, Kias, Hondas, Hyundais, but don't fall into the trap that all prudent cars have good resale. Like, for example, a Nissan Altima, heavy, heavy, heavy retail incentives mean very, very, very low percentage, meaning higher depreciation when bought new. The flip side of it is you can get a very new Altima for not too much money, meaning a used car that's like 2 or 3 years old that probably is 10 grand off of what it costs new. Now I'm kind of going down a different discussion. Maybe we can talk about that in another Ask MotoMan segment. Hopefully, Matt, this answered your question. And you know what? I probably haven't covered every single brand here, and I'm not going to cover every single brand here. So why don't you come up with some examples? Or you know what? I'd love to turn this into a discussion and find out what heavy retail incentives are you seeing out there, because I'm seeing these 20% on Chryslers, I'm seeing these ridiculously cheap leases on even the new Pacifica minivan, and the car's only been out, what, 6 months at this point? So it's highly unusual. I'm starting to see that. I'd love to see other examples that I haven't mentioned here. What are you seeing? And you know what? Not just what incentives are you seeing, I want to know if they're on leases, buys, and what region of the world do you hail from? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all in word, MotoManTV all in word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with two things. Number one, I'm kind of sick of telling you to unsubscribe, resubscribe, click notifications. What I'm going to say at this point is there's a lot of bugs around here, as you can see, but I'm going to ask you, you know what? Just watch our episodes consistently, hopefully in the first 24 hours. That helps us a lot because YouTube has butchered the platform for YouTubers big and small, no matter the genre, to the point where all YouTubers now call it adpocalypse. It's that bad. And number two, I want to leave you with a fun fact. And the fun fact is, I am not telling you this because I'm perfect on depreciation. I'm telling you this because I learned this lesson about as hard as you could because I made a humongous, terrible decision my first car. Not only did I finance it, which you know, But if you remember in the Bob Boniface Lancia Delta Integrale HF Santa Maria Madre de Dios, do I want one of those? And again, when I have a barn where I could put cars in it, I'm definitely going to have one of those. He asked you, what was my first car? And I don't think I ever answered you guys. Yes, it was Giugiaro designed, but it wasn't a Lancia. It was a 1986 Isuzu Impulse Turbo, black, tan leather interior, and man, did I think it was cool. I even, like every dumbass when they're young, I customized it. I cut a sunroof in it. I put a Nardi steering wheel. I put Momo 5-spoke wheels and like a Sony CD player back in the day. And God, did the depreciation monster rip my head off. And after that, never again. Until I see you next time, bis später.